Storms, after all, don't always start with thunder. Sometimes they begin with silence. The lounge smelled of leather and perfume, but beneath the surface lingered something rotten. Passengers chatted softly, attendants smiled wide, and everything looked polished. Yet the bruise on his face echoed deeper than the present moment. It pulled the past into the room, dragging old wounds into view. A memory surfaced, a black woman at check-in. Her ticket questioned, her seat mistakenly given away. The agent smiled thinly, saying, "It's a system error, ma'am." Her eyes filled with hurt, but she swallowed it, stepping aside while others boarded. Silence covered the theft like a polished floor hides cracks. Another flash. A boy no older than 10 clutched his boarding pass tight. A flight attendant crouched, smiling sharp. "Are you sure this is your seat?" "Where are your parents?" the boy stammered, pointing, but the question had already carved him down. Passengers looked away, pretending not to hear, and then the pilot, years back, one of the few who spoke. He had dared to raise his voice in the crew lounge. "This isn't policy. It's prejudice." By the end of the month, he was reassigned to freight flights, silenced without a headline. Narration. Each incident, small enough to be dismissed, large enough to scar, was buried in paperwork stamped "Resolved." Press releases carried words like commitment and progress, while dignity was left behind in the jet bridges. Now, in first class, laughter echoed, champagne poured, but the bruise on the young man's face spoke louder than the polished announcements. He didn't need to remind anyone of history. His silence dragged it forward, and for the first time, some attendants looked down at the ground instead of up, as if afraid the past they had hidden so well was finally walking back through the cabin. The first whispers began not in headlines, but in the quiet shuffle of papers across a newsroom desk. A young reporter leaned closer to her colleague, lowering her voice. "You remember that woman from '09? The one denied boarding?" The man nodded, hesitant. "I filed it." "They told me to drop it, said it wasn't newsworthy." Another voice joined in. "Same here." A pilot complained of bias training being ignored. He was reassigned within weeks. "They called it routine." The silence afterward was heavier than the words. For years, each had held fragments, buried under deadlines and discarded drafts. Now, the bruise on one young man's face pulled them back to life. Narration. In court hallways, the whispers found echoes. A mother recalled how her child was accused of theft on a plane, the humiliation left unspoken for over a decade. She had signed a settlement, told it was best for everyone. She had walked away with a check and a wound that never healed. In the newsroom, the reporter pressed record. "We were told no one would care. Maybe now." Her voice cracked, not with drama, but with exhaustion, the sound of someone carrying too many ignored truths. Narration. The stories moved like sparks, small, fragile, but refusing to die. They flickered in whispered testimonies, in late-night calls, in envelopes slipped beneath locked doors. Each voice carried the weight of silence, and each silence begged to be broken. For the first time, the institution felt a draft of unease. Its polished walls had cracks, and in those cracks, the past began to breathe again. And as those whispers grew, so did the sense that maybe, just maybe, the silence was finally running out of space to hide. The call connected in the middle of the night. The boy's voice was steady, but the silence between his words revealed the wound. It happened on the plane. That was all he said. On the other end, the billionaire did not ask for details. He breathed once, slow, and the weight of that pause carried more rage than shouting ever could. "I hear you," he whispered. The boy's voice cracked. "They slapped me. In front of everyone." Silence again. Then a single exhale, heavy, deliberate. "And you did not strike back?" "No, Father. I remembered what you taught me." Narration. The man sat alone in his study, his face unreadable. A storm lived behind that stillness, but storms this quiet never announce themselves. They wait. They measure. He leaned back, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good, you kept your dignity. Now let them choke on theirs." The boy hesitated. "What will you do?" "Nothing tonight," the father said, and that restraint felt sharper than vengeance. "But tomorrow, the world will know." Narration. On the other side of the world, the attendant laughed with a colleague, mocking her victim's silence. She thought silence meant weakness. She did not yet understand that some silences are threats carved in stone. The billionaire's stillness spread through the room like smoke, invisible yet suffocating. He did not slam the desk. He did not curse. He simply closed his eyes, whispering the same words his son once feared to hear. "They will regret this." And with that, the night held its breath, because everyone who had ever faced him in silence knew, when he chose not to roar, the ground itself began to tremble. The study light burned low, casting long shadows across the polished desk. He dialed a number few men on Earth could reach. It rang once. Then silence. A voice answered, old and sharp. "It's late." The billionaire didn't clear his throat, didn't soften his tone. "They touched my son." The pause on the other end was immediate, the kind that knew the weight of those words. "What do you want done?" He leaned forward, resting both elbows on the desk, his voice level. "No lawsuits, no noise. I want the system to feel what he felt. Quiet humiliation, permanent, irreversible." Narration. The men on the other end of the line were not lawyers. They didn't speak in contracts or settlements. Their conversations never made it to newsrooms. They moved airlines, governments, entire economies with a signature. "Consider it done," the voice said calmly. "But understand, this will not be small." The billionaire closed his eyes, remembering his son's trembling words. "Nothing about this is small." "Do it!" Another silence. This one darker, heavier. "Then tomorrow the sky changes." Narration. He ended the call without goodbyes. There were no handshakes, no paperwork, just stillness. He leaned back, fingers pressed together, and allowed the quiet to stretch. In another corner of the city, the attendant laughed again with her colleagues, oblivious to storms already set in motion. Her arrogance fed on the belief that silence meant safety, but silence had shifted. Silence was now a blade, and in that room, with nothing but the hum of the night around him, the billionaire whispered to himself, more a promise than a thought. They'll never see it coming. The world slept. Aviation did not. The video was shaky, caught on a phone that trembled in the witness's hand. A single slap, raw and uncut, replayed endlessly. Someone whispered off camera, "Did you see that?" The clip ended in silence, but online, it had only just begun. "This can't be real," a reporter muttered, staring at the loop on his laptop. Another leaned over, shaking her head. "It's real. Look at the uniforms. Look at the boy's face." Narration. What was once confined to the cabin now lived on every screen. Hashtags bled into timelines. Outrage climbed like fire against dry walls. The silence of passengers had become the noise of millions. The airline issued its first statement. Polished words. "We take these allegations seriously." Another press release followed, sterile, practiced, hollow. On a late-night call, a young employee whispered nervously to her manager, "This won't go away." "People are furious," the manager snapped back. "It always fades. They'll move on." "They always do." But even his voice cracked at the edges. Narration. Not this time. The slap had been recorded. The world had seen the hand, the sound, the boy's stillness. What was once denied now played in an endless loop that no denial could erase. "It's not just about him," someone tweeted. "It's about all of us who stayed quiet when it happened to us." Replies poured in, stories once buried, now unearthed with the safety of numbers. The airline boardroom fell into uneasy quiet. Screens lit the walls, every channel showing the same image, a hand raised, a bruise forming, a silence louder than engines. Narration. One blurry video had become a storm. And storms once started cannot be silenced. The room buzzed with cameras, their clicks sharp as knives. Reporters leaned forward, waiting. The flight attendant walked in stiff, shoulders squared like armor. For a moment, she looked untouchable. Then a microphone caught her breath, shallow, uneven. "You struck a passenger," a voice cut through the air. Her chin lifted. "He provoked me," she said, too quickly, too loudly. The words hung like smoke. Narration. In that instant, silence grew heavier than sound. It was not just a defense. It was an admission, one wrapped in arrogance but trembling at the edges. Across the room, the boy sat still, bruise faint but visible, his calm a blade sharper than any outburst. His father remained in the corner, expression unreadable, but every pause in his breath pressed against her like thunder. A reporter leaned closer. "Provoked you? A child?" His question was measured, his tone almost gentle, but the cracks widened. She swallowed hard. He disrespected authority. Rules matter, but her voice faltered on the last word. Cameras caught it. Screens broadcast it. The armor was slipping. Narration. Dignity does not need volume. Power does not need rage. Sometimes the quiet presence of those wronged is more dangerous than fists raised. The boy finally spoke, soft but unshaking. "I said nothing to you." The air shifted. Pen scratched across paper. Whispers filled corners. Her hands gripped the table, knuckles white. For the first time, her silence betrayed her. Confidence leaked, replaced by sweat gathering at her brow. Narration. The hearing room had chosen its side, not with words, but with stillness. And stillness, once broken, never returns the same. The room held its breath. Every camera, every pen, every stare leaned toward him. The boy's voice broke the silence, steady but low. "I am not here for my pain." The sentence struck heavier than any accusation. Reporters paused mid-note. Even the flight attendant, hands trembling, froze at the sound. "This bruise will fade," he continued, touching his cheek lightly. "But millions carry wounds no one sees. Wounds from being told to stay quiet, to sit down, to take what is given without question." Narration. He was not speaking only as a son, but as a witness for those who never made it into hearing rooms, those whose stories ended at gates, at check-ins, at cold stares in aisles. The boy looked directly at the officials. I was silent when she raised her hand. "I thought silence would protect me." But silence has been protecting people like her for too long. The words cut without anger, his calmness stripping away excuses. One of the panelists shifted uncomfortably. "You're saying this is bigger than an isolated incident?" He nodded. "Yes, bigger than me, bigger than her. It's a system that allows arrogance to strike and still be called discipline. My father told me once, power is loudest when it whispers. I understand that now." Narration. The room shifted. Authority, once centered at the table, slipped toward the quiet boy with the faint bruise. Dignity stood taller than arrogance. He ended with only 5 words, spoken without a tremor. "I stand for all passengers." And in that moment, history shifted, not with a roar, but with a whisper that refused to be silenced. The cameras had long gone dark, but the consequences lingered like smoke after a fire. Executives stepped down one after another, their carefully worded resignations failing to mask fear. Stock numbers bled red across screens, investors retreating. Narration. Power that once seemed untouchable was now unraveling thread by thread. Alone in her small apartment, the flight attendant scrolled through her cracked phone. Her fingers hovered over old photos, her daughter's smiling face, birthday candles frozen in time. She pressed play on a voicemail. The young voice echoed, "Mom, are you coming?" "Everyone's asking for you." The line ended with silence. Her eyes closed. She whispered into the emptiness, "I was only doing my job." But even she didn't believe it anymore. A knock at the door broke the stillness. It was her neighbor, shifting awkwardly. "Papers saying more resignations today. You holding up?" She forced a smile. "I'm fine," the neighbor hesitated. "Fine doesn't sound like fine." Then he left, and the hallway grew quiet again. Narration. Privilege had once built her armor. Uniform, authority, protection from blame. But armor rusts when the world stops defending it. She returned to the phone, replaying the voicemail once more. Softer this time. "Mom, are you coming?" The words hollowed her. Her daughter had stopped calling weeks ago. Friends stopped visiting. Even the airline stopped returning messages. For the first time, she whispered to herself, "I lost everything." And in that whispered truth, the silence around her deepened, not of peace, but of isolation. Narration. Power can shield for a season, but when it collapses, it leaves nothing to hold on to, except the sound of one's own disgrace. ChatGPT said, the boardroom was dim, curtains drawn tight. Men and women in polished suits sat stiff, their voices hushed though no press was present. Narration. Power rarely admits fault, but cracks were now too deep to hide. One executive cleared his throat. "We can't afford another scandal," another replied, sharper. "This isn't just about money anymore. It's about survival." On the table lay a stack of papers, drafts of new regulations, policies rewritten in rushed ink. Pages that spoke of sensitivity training, oversight committees, accountability, once laughed off as unnecessary. A younger voice broke through. "We never listened before. That silence nearly ended us." No one answered. Silence held heavier than words. Narration. Systems do not fall with noise. They bend slowly, resisting until the weight of truth leaves them no choice. A woman at the far end leaned forward. "We have to change the manuals. Every line, every word. Flight crews must know, racism will not be protected here again." An older executive scoffed but didn't push back. His eyes betrayed weariness, not defiance. The room shifted. Once arrogance ruled these halls, now fear had pried open space for something new. Another voice, low but certain. "If one young man could expose us with calm, imagine what millions could do if we ignore this." No one dared argue. Narration. The change was not loud. No headlines announced the clauses rewritten that night. But history does not always turn with fireworks. It often moves in silence, clause by clause, policy by policy. And in that silence, a system once untouchable was bending. Not willingly, not gracefully, but undeniably. The jet bridge hummed with the sound of rolling suitcases and muffled announcements. He stepped forward, calm, shoulders squared, no longer carrying the weight of humiliation but the quiet armor of dignity. Narration. Sometimes history returns not with banners but with footsteps on worn carpet. A man in the aisle seat looked up. No words, just a small nod. The sun returned it, subtle but heavy with meaning. A woman leaned closer to her child and whispered, "That's him." The boy's eyes widened. He did not look away. The attendant, different from the one who once struck him, froze for a heartbeat, then straightened. "Welcome aboard, sir." Her tone carried respect, not rehearsed politeness. He smiled faintly. "Thank you." Narration. The sky was no longer silent. Each look, each nod, each whisper built a new truth in the air. Two men in suits avoided his gaze, shifting in their seats. Their silence was not comfort but unease, privilege learning its boundaries. A passenger across the aisle leaned forward. "For what it's worth, you spoke for all of us that day." He hesitated, voice steady. "I didn't speak for myself. I spoke because silence, it never protected us." The hum of the engines filled the pause. But the cabin felt different, not just metal and seats, but a place where dignity had returned quietly, without demand. Narration. One slap had broken the sky's illusion, but it was not the strike that endured. It was the silence that followed, and the refusal at last to bow beneath it. His eyes scanned the cabin. No applause, no spectacle, just recognition. And in that recognition, change had taken root.